Hello, lords and ladies. Welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon. High Guardian Spice has been a very controversial show for a few years now. Not so much because of its premise or contents, but because of the folks behind the show's actions and due to Crunchyroll, former pirating site, using money to fund their own cartoon instead of, I guess, using that for actual Japanese animation or supporting Japan's own animation industry. But I've no interest in talking about that today, though. But because of all that, and the show disappearing for a while as if it was prematurely cancelled, I went into this show thinking it would be either super bad, or maybe not as bad as people said. Like, you'd either maybe love it or hate it with no room in between. And just to get my judgment out of the way immediately, I'd say going by episode 1 only, it's just average. It's not so bad you want to claw your own eyes out, but not so promising and spectacular that you just can't wait to watch episode 2. It's somewhere in the middle. The episode follows basically the standard fantasy genre formula to a T. You have 2 young girls heading off on their adventure to join a magical school wherein they will be learning a variety of skills to become, I guess, guardians, who are only vaguely defined in this episode. I guess they're just protectors of stuff, I suppose. Along the way, they get into a bit of mischief, and meet 2 other characters who obviously will become their friends at some point. If the theme song didn't clue you in on that already, of course. All in all, you have your average RPG party. A knight, a mage, some blacksmith, and an archer. I think my biggest problem with the episode is just how average it comes off. You absolutely do not need to reinvent the wheel every time you make something. Sometimes you can just do an overused concept really well, and that's okay. But this first episode doesn't really click for me. It's like I've seen this a dozen other times in countless other shows like Winx, or even live action films like Harry Potter that do it way better. The characters are also so cookie cutter, it's kind of boring to watch at times. In a lot of shows, that can be helped by 1 or 2 characters, or maybe even the main one, being fun to watch. But this episode doesn't really make me like anyone who has showed up. Part of why is, unfortunately, due to the voice acting. Rosemary's especially grated on my ears.
Sorry.
I think the only voice that didn't irritate me was the blue-haired girl, whose name I can't even recall. There was also this scene being passed around on social media when the show aired, and while it's not as awful as people are saying it is a bit cringy in its writing.
You almost chop off a person's head one time, and it's like, I was sure I was gonna have to fight her to defend your honor.
My hero.
Also, this is only a minor gripe, since I imagine further episodes do a far better explanation of the magic, because this is just episode 1. But it didn't seem very explained in this episode. Like, I couldn't get a feel for how it's supposed to function, why it's used in certain ways, or what the difference between old and new even means. The girls expect to sleep on the floor in this one room in this particular scene, but their cousin, I think, opens up a portal to their actual rooms. In the morning, they peer out the window at the city below, but I'd assume the room was magically created. So where is the room then? Is it located elsewhere? And the couple make great use of owning 2 locations by combining them via this teleportation thing? Or what? I didn't really understand. Also, some folks have complained about the art style, and while I understand you would imagine that an anime streaming site would fund something more Japanese style, it doesn't really look terrible to me. It's average, in the same way the premise is very average. It's even, dare I say, kind of cute at points, even if some of the character designs are a bit odd. Plus, I'm not sure if this was just my video and maybe it messed up when it was downloaded, but the mouth syncing to the characters' voices didn't always line up. It bugged me, and then I couldn't stop noticing it throughout the entire episode. I did manage to find one positive moment that I liked in the episode, though. I'm trying to do that for episodes or shows that I dislike. For this one, the little scene with the thieving animal. Its little mating dance was super cute, and it made me smile. Of course, it did eventually end, and the plot resumed, but it was a shining light of quality in a rather dull first episode. So, just to make sure it's not misunderstood when this goes live, this is not my full review or thoughts on all of High Guardian Spice. This is just how I felt watching its first episode, and all my thoughts therein are restricted to that first episode, okay? Okay, after watching this first episode, I can't say it was great, but it's also not garbage. There were degrees of mediocrity and somewhat average elements to episode 1, lip sync issues and iffy animations at times, lackluster voice acting, but it wouldn't be too hard to improve on it, right? Like, it's not a complete lost cause. But this first viewing of it just came off like every other fantasy story I've ever seen. That it was kind of hard, kind of difficult getting invested into it because of that. Of course, your mileage may vary, as I've heard a lot of people praise the show, though usually I think it went hand in hand with the inclusion of LGBT elements and stuff like that, and maybe not so much because it had a revolutionary good story or anything. Anyways, those are my thoughts on episode 1 of High Guardian Spice. This was part of my one-shot review series, so there aren't any immediate plans to review more of the show at this point. If you've seen the show, feel free to leave your opinion down below, and if you'd like to become a member of the channel, a link for that will be down below and in the cards throughout the video. Thanks for watching, and take care.
It's Cartoon Hangout, whoa, with Archaic King as your host. It's time to review some great cartoons, from Craig of the Creek to Scooby-Doo. Hello, lords and ladies, welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon.
Hello, lords and ladies. Welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon. Tough Luck features a return of Lucky Girl, and it's a big improvement over her initial debut back in Season 1. There's still signs of Gwen's arrogance when she's Lucky Girl, continually proving she and Ben are more alike than she thinks, but it's wonderfully balanced out with her concerns over not being useful or not being a hero. Ben does his best to let his cousin know that there's more than one way to do good in the world, a line that incentivizes her more than once in this episode. It also lets us see Ben's maturity, which we don't always see in these episodes. Of course, you have to take his assurance with a grain of sand, considering he's happy to have backup since he's been overworked this summer. As with the other episode featuring Gwen as a magical hero, this episode features the return of Hex. I have no idea how they kept him in regular prison, given he's still got enough magic to float, but Tough Luck also partially has the same problem his debut episode did. He's not a force to be reckoned with. He can give the characters some run for their money, but his magic never seems to really be as effective against Ben's brute force as I'd like. Granted, he's a little more competent this time around, yet his own niece takes him out of the fight. Ouch. Dude, for a cool as hell character voiced by Cyborg, you suck. Luckily, I like Charmcaster, one of the most attractive cartoon characters, and her debut is pretty fun. She's definitely a little more subdued, which weirded me out considering how she is in later series.
Isn't this the most fun ever?
But then by episode's end, you realize it was probably all an act. The submissive, kinky niece too afraid of her uncle's powers to go against him. Essentially, the episode is a slight improvement over the last Lucky Girl episode, but it does contain some of the same mistakes. Good thing it's got some slick animations, good interactions between our characters, and plenty of action to keep you distracted. And we seem to maybe be building towards something regarding Gwen and her affinity for magic, as seen when she wields a master staff and the magic orb thing winks back to life as she rides away. Whether this will pay off this season, I don't recall. If anything, this could just be setting up for another Lucky Girl episode in the next season. Either way, I hope it sticks with Charmcaster as a villain, because somehow she's far more threatening than her uncle. Anyways, what did you think about this episode? Do you think the writers don't treat Hex as a legit threat? Or am I just crazy? Sound off below. Thanks for watching, and take care. Hello, lords and ladies! Welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon. When I first learned there was going to be a sequel to one of my favorite Scooby-Doo movies, I of course was excited. Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island was a great movie, one with a much darker tone than normally depicted in the franchise, and is a type of tone that I would love to see return. Unfortunately, as time went on and more about the movie surfaced, I started to have my doubts. From the shift in art style and tone to how the gang had been written in the last couple of movies, it seemed like this was going to turn out to be one of those be careful what you wish for moments. And in a way, yes, that's exactly what Return to Zombie Island is, on top of being completely unnecessary. If you completely ignore that Zombie Island exists, it's not a bad movie. It's got the same charm and humor as most any Scooby-Doo media has, minus some weird meta jokes and gags that at this point in time really take you out of the viewing experience, aka the gang realizing they don't talk to each other about anything but mysteries, even though we all know that's not true. But here's the rub. Zombie Island does exist, and this movie, while definitely not as offensive as some more recent entries into fan-beloved franchises, doesn't do right by the original in my opinion. The plot sees the gang return to Moonscar Island as part of a scheme to get them to be in a movie based on the events on Velma's blog. Yes, she has a blog. The issue is she views the events of Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island as unsolved, on account of her most recent characterization being to completely disregard any and all things supernatural, even if it happens directly to her. Now, while I understand Velma is and will always be the voice of reason and science, I think it's idiotic to do a sequel to a movie where something truly spooky went on, and then have her dismiss it as actually happening. She even does this in the previous film. And if this is going to be how they write her in all films, then please, Warner Brothers, do not release another sequel to a previous Scooby film where supernatural stuff actually happens. Thank you. I also found it odd that they dumped the style and tone of the original film for the current direct-to-video look. I guess since this movie is far less spooky than the original, it wouldn't have made sense to do that, but that's kind of my point. Why make a sequel to a movie that legit was scary at times, but then go in the opposite direction? Like, imagine if Friday the 13th Part 2 was a comedy. Now, speaking of that, retcons. Oh boy, I hate them in most things because the attempt is usually shoddy as hell and disrespectful, and this movie decides to retcon the gang being adults in the original movie to now suddenly being teenagers again. Right. Because Daphne was in charge of a TV show for a summer. That totally makes sense and isn't some weird Warner Brothers mandate of late to keep them teens. It didn't make sense in Curse of the 13th Ghost. It doesn't make sense here. Now, before this becomes an incredibly negative rant, or you think I hated every moment of this movie, I did find things to like. As I said above, the humor is there. Legit, Return to Zombie Island can be a really funny movie. Especially the new character, Alan Smithy. He's a huge highlight of the movie. His film Everything, Even Though I Could Die attitude is hysterical. The film is also really well animated, so I have to give the animators props for some outstanding moments. Also, Daphne as a zombie. Low-key kinda hot. But, yeah, I'm not sure how to feel about this movie or the future of WB's direct-to-video series. It seems they're intent on milking some good old nostalgia from us old-time fans, but then just disrespecting the canon of the series. At least in instances where there is a canon, anyway. I promise you, I will riot if they do a sequel to Witch's Ghost and have Velma spend the entire movie trying to disprove it ever occurred. Just fuck that. No thank you. In conclusion, if you've never seen Scooby-Doo on Zombie Island or are good at pretending things don't exist in order for you to enjoy something, Return to Zombie Island, it's not half bad. It's got just enough comedy and spooks to help you celebrate Halloween night the right way. Sadly, if you're a longtime fan like me, you'll maybe be turned off by some inclusions, or in this case, attempts to exclude elements from the first direct-to-video Scooby-Doo movie where the monsters are real. And if this is a sign to come of the next few movies, well, count me out. And that is it for me. I hope you enjoyed this one-off review of Scooby-Doo Return to Zombie Island. I know it was probably a bit too bitter for your liking, and I probably forgot to talk about some things, but we can always discuss that in the comments or something. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.
It's Cartoon Hangout, whoa, with Archaic King as your host. It's time to review some great cartoons, from Craig of the Creek to Scooby-Doo. Hello, lords and ladies, welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon.
Hello, lords and ladies. Welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon, and the first of this month's filler content, otherwise known as one-off reviews, because I can't think of a better name for it.
Total Drama Island.
I've been a huge fan of the Total Drama series since it first aired back in, 2007? 2008? I've seen every episode of every season, and I don't think I could really say anything negative about it as a whole. We don't see too many competition cartoons these days, so when Total Drama came around, it was a real breath of fresh air. And despite a large cast of characters to juggle, it somehow managed to be both well-written and funny. You really connected with the characters, and became invested in their stories, their lives, and their drama. I plan to talk about the second most recent series, Redonkulous Race, back when it premiered, but I had trouble really reviewing the show. Not because the show was bad, it was just the format of the series, I suppose. So, of course, when Total Drama Rama came around, I knew I needed to at least talk about its first episode, Venthala. I'll start us off by saying that I was very concerned about this new spinoff. Couple the fact is yet another 22-minute cartoon decreased to a runtime of 11 minutes, with the show being a rather late entry into the babyfication trend, and you get a big red flag from old Archaic King here. The Total Drama cast as kids seemed like such a weird creative choice, almost like you could argue they ran out of ideas for competitions or races, so the writers just said screw it and placed the characters into a daycare setting. Still, I was surprised how fun the first episode was. It's as simple as the characters working to get Owen's ball back from Chef Hatchet, but it was very entertaining once I got past the initial WTF, they're all kids reaction. The confessionals and much of the humor you would expect from Total Drama is still there, just with some added surrealness to it, such as Owen randomly having a third arm and not knowing whose it is.
On the one hand, Noah is right. On the other hand, Duncan is right. On the other hand... Hey! Whose hand is that?
Or Chef walking around not knowing Duncan replaced his eye with a freaking marble. You'd think he would groan at these jokes, but they're played off really well, a credit to the writers and to the animators. By the time Owen and friends were in the vents, I was invested in these Tiny Toon versions of the Total Drama cast, plus 16's Jude for some unexplained reason. Despite the juvenile setting, it felt like a real adventure, a feeling I don't often get from other shows on Cartoon Network. And maybe that's due to this being made by Fresh TV Incorporated and not Cartoon Network proper. Another mark in its favor is that it's still created by the same two people who started the franchise to begin with, Tom and Jennifer. I think that fact is why Total Drama Rama still feels like Total Drama and not some shallow copy by someone else. So, while the gut reaction may be to write this show off as Cartoon Network taking yet another beloved series and throwing it to another generation, based on this first episode, I think I can suggest that this is still for fans of the original series. If they ever wanted to know what toddler versions of their favorite characters are like, that is. The humor and writing has not really changed too much. It's still weird, and will garner many a chuckle from you and probably even your kids. A highlight for me was Gwen, one of my favorites from the original, who is now an adorable goth toddler who talks about crane accidents and predicts the other characters' deaths in a vent. So yeah, it's yet another 11-minute Cartoon Network comedy, but so far it's actually good, which is a huge distinction. Don't believe me? Go check it out for yourself, and then come back and let me know your thoughts on the series. Thanks for watching, and take care. Hello, lords and ladies. Welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon. I didn't know much about this show going into it, but after just now watching the pilot, episode 1, Itch to Explore, I get major Kids Next Door vibes from it. That's not only a compliment, but also a good way to conceptually describe Craig of the Creek. The series follows 3 friends, Craig, Kelsey, and JP, and their adventures in and around a creek they live nearby. The creek operates as a vast playground of sorts for the kids of the neighborhood, a kid's utopia as it's described, a place where they can be who they want or what they want. Anything from paintball wars to exploring the unknown parts of the creek. And much like K&D, the children have their own little economy and culture going. And I love this, as it makes room for plenty of stories and fun to be told throughout the series. At the center of it are 3 incredibly likable protagonists. Craig, the more normal one of the group, Kelsey, who monologues pretending she's a hero, along with her quote-unquote Falcon, Mortimer, and the dumb one, I suppose, JP. The show does a splendid job of making you care about these characters. In fact, it really takes no time at all before you fall in love with these 3 little weirdos. Probably because the show is relatable. Adults can watch this and think back to a time when they were having adventures in their own woods or near their own creek. I myself recall such times, like when me and my sister would form our own K&D group or pretend to have our own adventures in the woods. I think the show really captures that innocent, adventuring quality quite well. Episode 1 sees the characters venture into a large field of poison ivy, hoping to make a name for themselves among the kids of the creek. Their overreaction to common day poison ivy in everyday situations is what really gave me the K&D vibe, and it's really funny. Especially Kelsey, who I ended up liking the most because of how weird her narrations were. And there's even a lesson about wanting a space of your own carefully snuck into the episode's plot, which was nice. I think this show is going to be really popular among kids, heck, even adults. It doesn't really talk down to anyone, so far at least, which means easier accessibility for any age group. While the animation style isn't thinking outside Cartoon Network's box, it's still not unpleasant to look at. I can very easily recommend Craig of the Creek. It's a fun, relatable show about the adventures you can have as a kid, even in the most mundane of settings, like a creek. Now, if you'd like to see me review this full time, you need to let me know. Sadly, I will be taking a break from YouTube for 2 months, but when I come back, I am open to picking up the latest episode and reviewing it from there. For now, why don't you let me know what you liked about Craig of the Creek? Thanks for watching, and take care. Hello, lords and ladies. Welcome back to Scooby Month on Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon. The final game I'll be covering for Scooby Month is Scooby-Doo Night of 100 Frights, a PS2 game developed by Heavy Iron Studios and published by the now defunct THQ. In it, you get to control Scooby-Doo as you headbutt, butt smash, and platform your way through a multitude of levels based on, or at least slightly influenced by, classic Scooby-Doo episodes, complete with a host of familiar Scooby-Doo foes. After the gang go missing upon arriving at Mystic Manor at the request of Daphne's friend Holly, Scooby-Doo must explore the various locales, solving puzzles, avoiding foes, and collecting all the Scooby snacks. In this game, these are extremely important, so don't let how many of them there are fool you. If you so much as miss a single box or snack, you could be backtracking through early levels when you need them to unlock snack cakes. So, get it into your head right now so you don't screw up like I did and spend 2 actual in-game hours tracking them down. Collect as many as you can. You also can collect monster tokens, which I believe unlock the monsters in the monster gallery so you can view their info. Throughout the game, you can also gain additional power-ups. Yes, Scooby-Doo does get power-ups. At first, you can't do much in the game, and you must avoid the monsters by either running away or jumping over them. However, eventually you will unlock a helmet that lets you headbutt enemies, activate switches, etc. Then there are springs that let you double jump, an umbrella to help you glide or levitate on top of fans, gum to temporarily stick enemies in their tracks, and finally, a soap bubble dispenser. This will let you jump on enemies to reach higher levels. There are also some abilities that let you sneak past foes, such as a lampshade or a suit of armor, but unfortunately, there aren't a lot of spots in the game that make use of this skill, so I never really used it that much. Now, as silly as some of these power-ups are, they're called inventions by their wacky creator, they are a godsend compared to what you have to work with in previous Scooby-Doo games, where you're essentially helpless to fight back. They give you multiple ways to tackle foes, some of which require a certain method or two to defeat them, like the Charlie robots in the later levels. To defeat them, you must first ram into them, then stomp on them. Otherwise, they'll take lives away from you, which is called courage in this game, and is gained by eating food you find. There are a lot of monsters in this game, and at first I thought it was padding. You know how classic Creep Capers had to fidget with the episode's plot to make it a full game's length? That's what I assumed was happening here. Several monsters from Scooby-Doo would appear in droves in Night of 100 Frights. You'd run into dozens of creepers, werewolves, zombies, and more. But by the end of the game, it is revealed why this is. I won't spoil that for you, but it actually makes sense, and it made me okay with the way they did it. And it's really cool to see which monsters made it into the game and what levels are at. Oh, and Don Knotts is in the game. So cool. Now, graphics-wise, the game has not aged all too well, even for a cartoony-styled game. The characters' face movements are really funny to watch sometimes, but even then, it is still cool to see classic moments taken from the show and implanted into the game, even if most of those are kind of the opening to the game, not in the game themselves. Another neat element is the chase music. Yeah, during every boss fight, there's a unique song that plays. It really gets you pumped up to beat the boss when it starts playing, though as the bosses become harder, you probably won't even pay much attention to it. As for bosses, you'll get to face the Black Knight, the Green Ghost, and the Ghost of Redbeard. It actually does take some amount of strategy to defeat them, though it'll mostly involve either ramming a switch, bashing a switch while working with Daphne, or using the foe's attacks against them. Trust me though, all three of them will have you foaming at the mouth. Now that I've explained the mechanics of the game, let's start getting into my opinion on it, which is, I kinda hate it. Don't get me wrong, the game starts off really well. It's not too difficult, there's some challenge, but at some point into the game, maybe the final third, it just ramps up in difficulty. I'm not even kidding, it's insanely hard. The biggest problem with the game is the platforming. The developers expect you to make these terribly precise jumps, and you just can't do that in freaking 3D space. Especially not in an old title such as this. More than a few times, I misjudged how close or far a platform was to me and fell to my death. Look at this chandelier. How close do you think that is? Oops, fell to my death. That's what I'm talking about. Early on, this doesn't really matter, and it's easy enough to recover, but by the final leg of the game, they want you to make even more precise jumps, whether from rotating boards, moving lamps, or sails. It's idiotic, and very easily taints my fun experience in the first 2/3 of the game. Another issue that I had is how Scooby moves. Some enemies, you need to ram them and bounce on them, or vice versa. But Scooby doesn't just automatically turn to face where you need him to after you've, say, bounced on an enemy's head. No, he actually rotates, which takes up very precious time you need to land, face the enemy again, and ram them. This is no more apparent than with the final boss, Mastermind. After dealing with wave after wave of enemies, some of the hardest ones in the game since you have to either bounce on them first, or vice versa, you need to butt smash him, then try to ram him into electricity, which is near impossible considering there are 2 Charlie robots with him. So even if you happen to smash him, they will more than likely damage you as you attempt to freaking turn Scooby around in time to ram Mastermind, who will at this point already be standing up and will probably also damage you. So you need to take the foes out first, but he'll just summon more. So you have to somehow smash him and ram him several times while avoiding those freaking robots. Good freaking luck. Look, the game's not all bad. Maybe I'm just really bad at it. Though the game's level, design, and difficulty can't be completely excused here. It did not have to ramp up this drastically, and the boss battles could have been tweaked. along with the general movement of Scoob. However, another nice thing I have to say is that it really does recreate a typical Scooby-Doo episode. Sure, there's a lot more to it since you're in a video game, but that's just freaking cool to play through. You have all these really unique environments to run around in, such as the mansion itself, a fishing village, factories, caves, graveyards, etc. And collecting the snacks can feel really rewarding, especially if you get the monster tokens too. Like I said, I had a lot of fun with this game before it became idiotically hard. Though another complaint that I have is that, unlike the previous game I covered for Scooby Month, there's little if any clue collecting. Scooby-Doo merely moves from one area to the next, sometimes encountering some of the gang who reflect briefly on what's going on before either being kidnapped or disappearing again. So I wish that had been more of an element in the game. It gets even more annoying when the gang explain the motivation of Mastermind in the end, and they actually recount clues you didn't see in the game yourself. Like, really? Come on, why couldn't I have had a hand in figuring out who it was? Not that it was particularly hard to see who it was a mile away, but still. Now that I mention that, there's a simple twist at the end regarding the bad guy's identity. While it's nothing groundbreaking or revolutionary, I did appreciate that it wasn't as cut and dry as it almost appeared to be. In conclusion, I've come to the same opinion on this game as other reviewers did back when it first came out. It's a fun, but very flawed game that delivers on certain aspects of what Scooby-Doo fans wanted in a game, but doesn't fully reach that lofty goal thanks to some janky controls, camera angles, and a harsh difficulty spike that had me literally wanting to kill myself. In the end, I think I would still recommend you play this. Just do it on an emulator so that you have save states. It won't be nearly as frustrating then. That's all from me. Did you play this game as a kid? How did you like it? Did you ever beat it? Let me know down below, and I'll see you soon for the conclusion of Scooby Month 2018. Thanks for watching, and take care. Hello, lords and ladies. Welcome back to Cartoon Hangout, your place for all things cartoon. I've always been meaning to do more reviews of video games based on cartoons ever since my last one, but alas, it just didn't work out. Well, luckily, I recently got my hands on this, gem, and I'm going to tell you about my experiences with the Ben 10 Reboot's first official video game. Developed by Outright Games, the same folks behind that one Adventure Time game I covered maybe a year or so ago, the new Ben 10 game is pretty much what you'd expect. In this game, you progress through various levels, pounding away at enemies with all 10 of Ben's aliens. Each alien has their strengths, and according to the loading screens, are better against certain types of enemies, though I never explicitly saw any evidence of this. There's quite a bit of variety thanks to Ben 10's aliens, as there should be, but you can also upgrade each alien 3 times in order to make the most of their abilities. Speaking of, you have 3 methods of attack. The regular attack, an alien ability that ranges from forearms, picking enemies up and throwing them, to accelerate, briefly slowing down time the longer you hold the button, and allowing you to attack and knock down enemies, and an ultimate. Now, don't get too excited. It's not the ultimate alien forms we saw in the later sequels of Ben 10. No. In this game, your ultimate is basically one giant attack that will usually wipe the screen of enemies. You'll build this meter up by attacking enemies, countering attacks, and so on. You don't really need to use it sparingly, as you'll get plenty of chances to rebuild it. From what I've experienced, the combat never gets too boring thanks to the variety in aliens, and the game is easy enough that you won't have too much trouble unless you go up against a bunch of tough enemies with a wrong alien. But again, I managed to make do with whatever my go-to fave was at the time. As far as levels go, this is sort of where things become a little underwhelming. Going into this game, I was under the idea that the game was 8 hours long. That's not a bad length, and while it certainly could be longer, I figured that meant there was some meat to this game. but instead the game only has 3 bosses and 6 levels. You can beat the game in about 2 hours or so. I suppose for who this game may be marketed to, that's not a bad runtime, but for the older Ben 10 fan, you may be left disappointed at how little there is to do in this game. There are 2 levels per boss. The city and the funhouse are Zombozos, the scrapyard and the hive are queen bees, and the final 2 levels are the weatherheads. There isn't much to the levels themselves, aside from some basic platforming sequences, a few places you need a specific alien to advance, and 3 hidden sumo cards. Outside of these cards, the levels hold no replayability, and they're generally so sparse you won't want to return to them later on. The sumo cards are the only collectibles in the game, and collecting them all will unlock Big Head mode. Yup, that mode you thought died 2 generations ago makes a return in this game. It's silly and unexpected, but not really worth collecting the cards for. Though I guess we're lucky it's only 3 cards per level and they're not too hard to find, though some will require a certain alien to gain access to. So if you want to replay through the game with all the characters with big heads, then go ahead and make sure to collect these. The real bit of variety in terms of levels would really be the boss fights afterwards, which take place in custom arenas suited for each boss. There's only 3 of these, which is a bit sad considering the amount of foes at the developer's disposal. I can only imagine this game must have been in development before the show was finished. Otherwise, what reason will they have for just 3 bosses in a Ben 10 title? Then again, there's 6 levels and the game is 2 hours long, so in what world would this take that long to develop? Zombozo as the first boss is obviously easy. Just avoid his traps and punch whatever blinking button appears. Easy peasy. Queen Bee is a little harder to avoid her attacks, that or it's just me, but a window of attack will appear every time she lands. So, yeah. The only boss I had a hard time beating was the final one, and that's just because I had a difficult time avoiding the various attacks he dish out. If this game weren't for little kids, and there weren't any lives or game overs, I can imagine I would have to restart that fight numerous times. After you complete the game, that's it. Unless you missed some cards or really want to get all the trophies, there's no other reason to continue to play the game. There's not much replayability that I can see. As my first Ben 10 game, it's all rather disappointingly average. However, for a game that's modeled after a reboot I dislike, it's not as eye-gouging as I expected. I mean, graphically, it could look better or take better advantage of the current-gen console's powers, but it's not ugly and the cel-shaded style suits it nice. The voice actors reprise their role and capture the tone of the show pretty accurately. The only other disappointing element is the story is non-existent. Each set of levels act almost like a typical 11-minute episode of the show. Hell, there's a trophy requiring you beat each level in under 15 minutes for crying out loud. Just without any of the thin plot you'd find in all of that. So that's a bit of a bummer. I may hate the show, but even I'd have preferred some sort of structure tying all the levels together. But nope. Just a bunch of standalone episodes, which seems to be a running trend, as the same can be said of Outright Games' previous Cartoon Network game, Adventure Time. So, honestly, in conclusion, I'd give this game maybe a 6.5 or a 7 out of 10. It's not a bad game. It looks good, runs fairly well, despite a dangerously bad glitch in the canyon level that makes me have to quit the game to fix it, and isn't that much of a chore to complete. It's certainly something that little kids will likely have some fun with. However, if you're an older fan, I wouldn't really recommend this unless you're just dying of curiosity. There's no compelling story to hold you over, and the game is just way too short and not that in-depth. If you do get it on sale. I can't suggest it otherwise. And that's all I have to say on Ben 10. Have any of you played this game? What are your thoughts on it? Leave any comments down below, and I'll see you soon for more Cartoon Hangout content. Thanks for watching, and take care.